So, I'm not a police officer myself, but I work with a lot of police officers on a day to day basis. Normally, I see 4 or 5 officers a night, right? And when I have a certain rapport with an officer, I like to, be candid with them and strike up conversations when we're waiting on something like the evaluation of a patient or we're waiting for a patient to be medically cleared, whatnot. And I like to say to them things like, hey man, do hashtag Black Lives Matter? Because there's this, huge storm across the country of protests and whatnot. And pretty much all of them, chuckle and roll their eyes, and they're telling me, of course, Black Lives Matter. But I live in Colorado. I've been told that, maybe I might get a different response in, say, Virginia, West Virginia, Alabama, Mississippi, maybe Louisiana. That Black lives might not matter to some of them, maybe in those areas. And I think that's probably stereotypical, but it's kind of a reflection of the state as a whole, not so much just people in that state who join the police, because every major police department has mandatory training about racial diversity. And I don't think any policeman would ever come out and say, hey, no, black lives don't matter. So it's a bit of a straw man that's really painful when it's used to bludgeon cops with, like some of them have actually said stuff like that. On average, as a whole, cops have more diversity training than the communities that they serve. You'll find more people in those communities that they serve that would say stuff like Black Lives Don't Matter than you would in the police department. So it's tough for them to take, They get called pigs, they get called the Gestapo, they get called stormtroopers, and all the while they largely, everyone that I've talked to, they feel for the people who have been hurt by a few cops. And they don't even bring up the same defenses for themselves that I've heard other people bring up. Like, oh, well, that black people kill more black people than cops kill, and cops kill more white people. They don't even say stuff like that. They're like, man, that was a really fucked up thing that happened, and I really like that they're protesting. I just wish that they would, realize that most cops are there for them and get into law enforcement in order to make a positive change in the world. That's from their side, from their viewpoint. But this whole thing about hashtag Black Lives Matter got me thinking about what are some of the real abuses that I see day to day in my field. And I know I've already talked about how the M1 hold in Colorado can be abused. Now, the M1 form it's a Colorado form. It's a mental health hold. Now, on it, a lot of times police officers will check the term gravely disabled, which basically means their life is in danger. It's a strange way of putting it, but if you might harm yourself, you are gravely disabled. Let's say a police officer brings a person into an emergency room, and instead of arresting them and taking them to jail, they want to dump them off on the emergency room. They've filled out this form called the M1, and they give it to the nurses, who then do all the registration work and get this patient admitted to one of the ER rooms, and then they take over custody of that patient. Now, the M1 is supposed to be for 72 hours. And there are two major types of people that can put an M1 hold on a person: police officers and doctors. Both are given by statute the ability to place an M1 hold on a person, and they're just supposed to not ever abuse it. First type of abuse that I can tell you happens is the policeman's M1 hold somehow doesn't make it to the right place in a patient's charts, and then the doctor will write another M1 hold in its place. And the time stamps on both of those pieces of paper do not match. And whichever one is convenient for the hospital to use will be used in the end. I've seen an evaluator who is about to discharge a patient just completely say, well, there's two of them here, I only need one, so we're just going to go with this one and toss this other one. You know, as if it's not an important record of what happened that this patient might want later on. They just get rid of the confusion and say, oh, there was only ever one. Like the policeman brought them there, and then the doctor filled out the form instead of the policeman, you know? I'd say that the paperwork trail is important, but I do see that it gets altered a lot. Also, when someone is drunk and turned into the hospital, the M1 hold can be delayed. And I know I've talked about this before, especially on a Thursday night when it would be hard to get someone into detox treatment over the weekend. Think about the 72 hours. Okay, so they will wait to put the 72-hour hold on a drunk person until they have gotten sober, which can take a very long time, because you think a normal healthy person gets rid of 0.03 of their BAC per hour, but a person with liver damage from drinking can get rid of a lot less. I've even seen BAC go up on a person over time, you know, strangely enough. And they weren't drinking in their room, but, you know, the reading just went up from the previous reading. It happens. So, during that time where a drunk person is not on a hold yet, they are free to leave. They could just get up and walk out of the room. But what happens if they do? Well, a doctor could, right as they're leaving, say, hey, hold that person. And the doctor can fill out the paperwork later. You know, they have the right to do that, actually. In you know, times of need, they can just say, hey, hold that person while I go do the paperwork. So that makes a person free to leave unless you want to leave. And that sucks, because then the 72 hours starts when the doctor fills out that paperwork, not when they first came into the hospital. And that can be something very important to someone. You know, how much time do I absolutely have to be here against my will? I have also seen a sort of breach of confidentiality. It's a workaround whereby certain patients who have become frequent flyers, especially for ETOH, that's ethanol poisoning or being drunk with alcohol, certain patients will register 5 or so occurrences where they have come into the emergency room and they have blown over 300. Now, when I was a kid, they taught us that 500 was death, 300 or 400 was coma, and 300 was really, really impaired. But that's not true when you have somebody who has a tolerance. I have seen 700s and 800s blown. And there are ways around the confidentiality of patients that will let policemen know that the same patient has gone in for the same reason. One of those ways is the M1 forms that policemen fill out are not covered by the confidentiality when the carbon copy is taken back to the police station. And they can look through their own records of all their M1 holds. And I have seen patients have their medical care hurried up so that they can be discharged. And they're drunk, and they think, oh, well, that's cool, I'm getting out of here. And as soon as they walk out of their emergency room door right there, they are picked up by policemen who take them off for a 90-day commitment. Okay? And the method of tricking them into that situation where they will walk right into the police officers is something that I see as, it's a good thing and it's cleaning up America, but setting them up for that situation by making sure that the policemen are there and making sure that they know that they've filled out M1 forms on this person before, that's kind of wrong in a way, And the last instance of M1 hold abuse that I want to talk about, this one will drive MRAs fucking crazy, okay? I was watching a man who had suicidal ideation, and this happened 1 month ago. He had fashioned for himself a noose with rope, and he had left it where his fiancée could find it. Now, his fiancée had already told him that she was planning on leaving him, and so he wanted to scare her into loving him again by showing that he was willing to kill himself if she left. And he found that he could not buy ammunition for a gun to leave the ammunition out because he went to go buy it and they said, well, you have to wait a day. And that wasn't quick enough for him. He wanted to make the impact right away, so he went and bought a rope and tied it into a noose and then left it out where she could find it. So, of course, she calls the police. And when I take custody of this patient, it's been about a day and a half, and he is really tired of being cooped up in his ER room, but, there were not a lot of evaluators that were connected to his insurance. The psychological evaluators, if you have Medicaid, you get the Community Reach evaluator. If you get some other form of insurance, you're going to have to wait for the ones that are connected to your insurance. Kind of like in-network doctors and dentists, right? So he's waiting and waiting and waiting, and finally, his evaluator shows up. Now, first the evaluator talked to him for about an hour. Okay? But then they do what is called collateral contact. Okay? They try to confirm the things that this patient said to them by talking to the people that reported him and talking to other family members, right? So this patient gave his evaluator his fiance's phone number, because she was the one who called the police because he left the noose out for her to find. So the evaluator leaves the room. He's stuck in the room because he's being held. And she goes to another part of the building and she calls the fiancé. And that fiancé tells her, "Oh shit, you're about to let him out? I'm moving out of his house right now. I need some more time." The evaluator made the decision that under the clause of this patient did not have a safe environment at home to go to, she was going to reschedule his evaluation for the next day in order to give that situation time to, fix itself. So this fiancé got an entire extra day to move her stuff out of this man's house. And my concern at that point, which I could not tell the patient at all what had happened, that would be completely unethical. My concern at that point is there's no policeman guarding his stuff. There's nothing keeping that woman from taking anything she wants. He can't be there to say, "Hey, wait, no, that's half mine," or "Hey, wait, no, that is mine." And the M1 hold process was used in that instance to give a girlfriend, a fiancé, an extra day to move out of her house. And so his rights, unbeknownst to him, his freedom is delayed an entire extra day because his fiancé wants to move out on him. And I don't know what I would do differently. I just know that it's a fucked up situation. That, it could even be more abusable than that. It could be the case where somebody reports that someone has suicidal ideation falsely and gets them committed to this M1 hold, this 72-hour hold, and then tells the evaluator, "Hey, I need time to move out. His home isn't a safe place because we're going to fight if he finds out that I'm moving out on him." This is a very scary thing to me to think that, this is that abusable, that easy. That easy. 2 phone calls. That's it. Some text messages that could be faked. Text messages that could be taken out of context and just explained to the police officer before he makes the M1 holdout. Explained to him in a way that makes sense as suicidal ideation. One of these times that I've seen someone on a hold, what he said was, "Well, fuck it. I'm going to go for a walk, and whatever happens, happens." And I know you could read a lot into that. I could read into it that, he might kick a stray dog walking down the street, you know. He might get into a fight with someone. He might go drinking at a bar, you know. But the way that it was interpreted, the guy got put on hold. And he had to wait for his evaluator. So, yeah. Sometimes it's not just the police or medical staff that abuse the holds and the way that the law is written. Sometimes it could be actually the public at large that do it. So that's enough for today. Let me know what else you want to know about aberrant psychology.